Good morning, everyone. We will begin in just a few minutes. We're going to let everybody wander on into the webinar. Thank you. Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Cory Warren. I'm the Senior Events Manager at Search Discovery, and I am the new manager of the Search Discovery education community. So I want to welcome you all today to my first webinar with the company, and I'm happy to have you all in the audience. Today, we're going to have a conversation about making the transition to Google Analytics, easier said than done, Analytics 4, and what to expect and how to prepare. With us today, we have Cory Watson. He is the analytics engineer at Search Discovery. Cory is an amateur mixologist, a professional full stack developer turned analytics engineer from rural North Georgia. He loves developing standards for analytic implementations, especially GA4, and has had a hand in many of the tools built by Search Discovery in the past few years, including the DAA Best New Technology Award-winning Apollo Analytics Management System. In 2019, Cory was nominated as top consultant by the DAA. And up first, we will have Melissa Monte. She is a performance measurement and analytics lead at Google. Melissa partners with independent agencies and enterprise clients to further their data and tech capabilities, focusing on lower funnel measurement, first-party data strategy, and the evolving privacy ecosystem. Prior to joining Google, Melissa was a member of the analytics and data science teams at Epsilon, Razorfish, and The Skim. Welcome, both of them, and thank you both for joining us today. And now we're going to hand it over to Melissa.
Hi, everyone. So great to be here today. I'm excited to take the next couple minutes just to provide a super brief introduction about the future of analytics and kind of why we're here today. Next slide. Awesome. So we're living in this new world of measurement. These industry changes that are happening, these regulatory changes that are happening are impacting all of our advertising solutions. And no one solved all of them yet. I think that we're looking at the new normal being less data, figuring out how to do less or more with less. And it's really critical to get the most out of your first party data, now more than ever. Google's really uniquely positioned to offer solutions to improve your insights by leveraging the first party data that your clients are collecting and introducing best in class modeling wherever possible and where needed to fill in the gaps. For example, we'll extend our modeling capabilities to certain reports in GA4, which is the topic of today's discussion, in order to enhance the understanding for customer journey kind of process and observe behavioral data where it's not available right now. GA4 in particular will have more capabilities than Universal Analytics and offers kind of the best digital analytics solution for the future, including all the new features that we're launching for GA. You can go to the next slide. This is a great quote from our kind of VP of analytics, right? So the bottom line is that the future of data is consented, it's modeled, and it's first party. And that's what Google's using as our guide for kind of the next 3 to 5 years in terms of kind of where the data is going. Sorry, stop looking at the chat. I think it's a great kind of indicator for where things are headed. You know, the next slide. So there are 3 key use cases that are impacted in this kind of new world of measurement, and that's conversion measurement, audience activation, and user journey measurement. One key element of our solution for all 3 of these use cases is the ability to onboard your first-party data and the identifiers associated with it. Many of you are already familiar with user ID feature that exists in UA. It has been rebuilt for GA4 properties. We're doubling down on user ID and user ID-like functionality as we begin to see these kind of first and third-party cookies become less reliable over time. User ID is the way for you to provide your own identifier for cross-site and cross-platform measurement for your users. And, it's typically this would be the identifier that you're generating for users when they sign up. What we're extending later this year and next year is the ability for you to bring in hashed data, hashed first-party data, like email addresses or phone number. What we're currently using for enhanced conversions as well as customer match in our Google Ads solution. And the other element for all three of these use cases is kind of an integration with Chrome's privacy sandbox, which we're continuing to provide additional updates and launches to. And our goal there is to make sure that we're providing reliable conversion measurement through privacy preserving APIs. So that kind of sums up how we're building for this kind of next new normal. And with that, we can head to the next slide. Awesome. So in addition to kind of these privacy challenges, right, marketers need a solution to address the industry challenges that predate them. According to, I think, a pretty recent Forrester survey, we've heard things like cross-platform analytics, predictive analytics, and customer journey understanding are the challenges that are currently being faced by marketers when they're looking at kind of closing the gap on audience conversion in customer journey path measurement. And so I will say that, Google Analytics 4 is a solution that is designed to address all of these concerns, all while protecting user privacy. I think that it's really important to think that, heading into the next kind of 5-10 years of measurement, privacy, durability, and consented first-party data really is the future. Go to the next slide. I feel like it's also great to level set on kind of where Google Analytics has been, right? So in 2005, Google acquired Urchin, which became kind of the universal analytics that folks knew and loved for the past 15 years. And the launch of Analytics 360 and then Firebase in 2016 were some really big changes, but nothing has kind of shaken up the tool, right, as much as this launch of Google Analytics 4 when it moved to beta in 2018. The product's been out of beta since 2020. We're super excited that all of the new features that we're launching are being launched in Google Analytics 4, and we're excited to see kind of how use cases for this product and case studies continue to develop over time. The next slide. Awesome. And I think this is my last slide here, but kind of a high level summary on I think why it's important that we're having this conversation today, right? So first is that GA4 has really been developed to help marketers meet the solutions for the needs that they're facing today, right? So first is kind of collecting and measuring on a very customizable level. So we've got a new event-based data model, which kind of merges site and app data, helps you make better data-driven decisions across platforms, regardless of where users are interacting with your brand. We can also kind of create these combined views of data to kind of, again, dismantle internal silos when it comes to app versus web measurement and manage large amounts of data across platforms. You're able to analyze for insights, right? So Google Analytics 4 has machine learning completely embedded into the tool, providing analytics with really powerful insights like predictive audiences, for example. We're able to leverage these insights, data-driven attribution, again, kind of provide these really quick learnings to provide value to businesses. We're also able to integrate your data, right? So the data that you're collecting in GA4 is exportable at the hit level out to BigQuery. You're also able to pull in the data that you're collecting from GA4 into Google Ads and across our bidding arms, which is really powerful. And we've also got multiple options, right, to exist kind of the view that you're seeing. So data import and measurement protocol, ways to, again, further customize the data that you're collecting. And finally, kind of pulling it all together, right? You're able to develop this really comprehensive plan for activation based on the, interchannel attribution that you're seeing in GA4 and through our platform integrations. And these direct integrations really enable unified conversion measurement and reporting and allow clients on GA4 to have a really fulsome understanding of who their clients are, where they're coming from, and how they can find more clients like their most valuable ones. So with that, I hope that sets the stage for kind of why GA4 now. And with that, I will pass it along to kind of talk through the specifics. Thanks so much.
Hey, Melissa, thanks so much for giving us that great overview of the tool and kind of Google's thinking on everything. So for those of you who didn't catch the very beginning, my name is Cory Watson. I am not Ken Williams. Got a little more facial hair than Ken. So Ken, he was not available today, but he and I recently gave this presentation at a Web Analytics Wednesday in Columbus. So he asked me if I would step in and kind of pinch hit and cover the same topic. So I will do my best Ken Williams impression to kind of help cover 6 steps to transition to Google Analytics 4. So essentially, this will not be a super technical dive. If you're looking for technical, we've, have had other content about that in the past. This is more of for your business decision makers, for your analysts, for your people running your analytics program. What do you need to consider as you're looking to move to Google Analytics 4? So as probably everyone is aware, Google has announced that Universal Analytics will be sunset in either July or October of next year. And so we wanted to get some content out there to help you begin planning your migration if you've not already done that, and to just prepare you for it. So let's go to the next slide. So as I said, there are 6 steps to this transition we've identified. The first step is to set your objectives. So to kick this off, the first thing to know is that Google Analytics 4 is not an incremental improvement on Google Analytics 3. It is an entire rebuild, reimagining, rethink of how the tool works, how it's architected, and all of that. So essentially, this is your opportunity as a company to not only look to implement Google Analytics 4, but also to really look at how and what you're measuring, to really kind of rethink your analytics, program, your analytics goals. And so we really encourage you, as you move into the process of looking at Google Analytics 4 at your transition, to start reevaluating what have we been measuring, what have we been missing, and what else do we need to be measuring. So we strongly encourage you, as you're kicking this process off, to start asking, what are the critical conversions? What are the critical behaviors that need to be captured and need to be accessible to our team? So essentially, we at Search Discovery, when we're working with clients, one of the big things we do is we just ask, what are the business questions that you need answered? And because if you don't know the questions you need answered, then when you go to implement the tool that's going to answer it for you, then you probably won't get everything you need, right? So we really encourage you to sit down and ask, like, what questions should analytics be answering? What questions should this tool be informing? What are our core KPIs, our key performance indicators, those numbers that we really need to move in one direction or another? And then focus in on those, get those documented, get those written up. And then what questions will your stakeholders have about these KPIs that can be answered using GA4? And so if you pop to the next slide, it's actually the same slide, but GA4, as I said, represents kind of a fundamental shift in the way that we think about our data. So historically in Google Analytics, we've thought about 2 different types of events, or 2 different types of kind of engagements that happen on our websites. We have page views, and then we have events. Well, Google Analytics 4 has, as we've kind of taken the mobile influence that's come into the world, as we've taken the influence of single page apps, and really the Firebase tool that Google acquired and has implemented a few years back, the idea of page views as a separate, distinct entity has kind of gone away. If anyone's built a Google Universal Analytics implementation, we have this concept of virtual page views that we've used a lot, which is kind of a weird construct. Basically, we're trying to take something that's not a page view and report on it as a page view to kind of get around some of the limitations that Universal Analytics had, so that we could get better pathing and other things like that. The nice thing about GA4 is it doesn't have a distinct concept of a page view necessarily. A page view is just a special event. And so everything now is an event, and you should start thinking about everything as an event. So as we said, KPIs now become your events, your named events, right? So if your KPI is we need to increase X, then we need to increase the number of events named X that come through in our system. Whereas other than events, kind of the other half of the Google Analytics event architecture, you have the event, named event, and then you have parameters that describe or contextualize that event. So if anyone's actually ever worked with Adobe, this is kind of similar to what its approach has been, which is, we have distinct conversion events or success events, and then we have evars and props to describe it. This is a similar approach where we have named events, and then we have dimensions that break down those events and provide context. So as you're starting to work out your objectives, your KPIs, your measurement plan, think about it in that way. What are the things, the events that we care about on our website that our users are doing? And then what are the contextualizing bits of information we need to properly describe those events. Those become your parameters, and that's your architecture for your implementation. So, and we have this little meme here because essentially if you go into a GA4 implementation without a plan, you'll probably end up in a situation where you miss some key KPIs, you miss some key data that you didn't know you needed, you forgot to ask a specific stakeholder that covers a certain part of your site. You'll just miss something, or maybe you'll over implement and have a lot of events that don't make sense and kind of cover things that you don't actually necessarily need to report on. We talk to clients a lot about how more data is not always better, because if you have too much data, then it's hard to drill down into specifically what you need. So definitely go into your implementation with a plan and know what you want to track. Next slide, please. So once you have kind of had your discovery conversations, you've talked with all of the key stakeholders, and when I say all of them, I mean all of them. We encourage you to talk to your marketing teams, your advertising teams, talk to your product managers, ask your product people, what sort of information do you need to make better decisions about our products? Your brand managers, talk to your IT team, because they will likely be involved in this. Make sure that they understand why these things are needed, what business questions you're trying to answer. Once you have all those conversations, we encourage you to actually put that down into a written document that kind of describes what the implementation will look like. So to give you some more context around this, as we said, events and dimensions, or properties, as we call them, are kind of the core of the implementation. But in addition to your events and dimensions, if anyone's built a universal analytics implementation, you know that we've always had kind of this concept of events and dimensions were defined by this singular approach, which was category action label. If you've worked through any universal analytics implementation, you've looked at those a lot, you know that every event needs a category and an action at minimum, and then maybe a label if possible. And then the other piece that we typically focused on in universal analytics was goals. We wanted to set up the correct goals and make sure that we had those right. A feature in universal analytics that I never saw used very much was metrics. We had custom dimensions that were used if category action label weren't enough. If we needed to capture other descriptive dimensions, we would put them in custom dimensions, but we didn't really use metrics that much. And I think the reason is that we had this goals feature that kind of did what custom metrics would do for us, and in maybe an easier to implement way. You could set it up to look for specific categories, actions, and labels, specific page views that came through. We relied heavily on goals to kind of provide those incremental numerical values that we were looking for. One thing to know about GA4 is that goals are gone as a concept. We don't have goals anymore as they've traditionally been thought of. So now metrics are a lot more important, and events, just the fact that a named event came in, kind of counts as a pseudo metric by itself. So just kind of prepare yourself to think in a different way about these, and start thinking beyond just, goals and beyond just certain categories, actions, and labels coming in. Start thinking of naming your events things that are intuitive and make sense, and also building metrics around them so that you can actually count things and watch them go up or go down and measure them from there. Another thing that's really important is validation. To be able to, we can map out everything we need to capture, but then how do we actually check and make sure that we're capturing it correctly, that our implementation is working, that we've been successful? That's one thing that we see a lot of clients tend to skip over or just not put as much thought into. And then when we get to the end of the project, we need to know, is it working or not? And we don't necessarily have a way to validate that. So one thing we encourage you to do up front is, as we said, as you're talking with your stakeholders, as you're determining what you want to measure, actually start looking at the pages on your site where you need to measure those things, and creating a map of how are we going to validate that this is working correctly. I worked with one client recently who has an e-commerce site, and we were working on their search event. And search seems pretty straightforward, right? You just type something into a search box, hit enter, and you record that a search happened. And maybe you look at the search results and say what facets they used when they searched, what filters they used. But this search was very intricate in the way it worked. You typed in your search term, and then it actually popped up a preview list of products that matched without you even having to hit enter. So it was kind of dynamically loaded in. Here's what matches. You could pick a product off there, or you could hit enter and perform the full search, and then a full search result set would return. Well, if you're trying to look at your product finding method, it might interest you to know if they clicked the product out of that final search, or if they clicked it out of the initial dynamic results that were shown before the full search took place. And it also might interest you to know that they only had to type 3 letters of the product name before it actually showed up. So, there's a lot of intricacies there. There are actually a lot of cases that we needed to test to make sure the events were coming through correctly. It wasn't just as simple as, test that when someone types in the word and hits enter, that it works. We had to scope out at least 6 different tests to make sure we covered all cases, that their implementation was working correctly. So just be aware that, especially if you have single page app type sites, sites built in React or Vue or Angular that have lots of dynamic loading, you may have a lot more complicated, opportunities, we'll call them, to capture data, but validating those opportunities can be difficult, and you want to make sure that you've covered all of them. So a few more pieces on the side here. One of the things that has changed with GA4, if you've implemented universal analytics, you know that there's a certain structure to use for page views and a certain structure to use for e-commerce, right? If you've ever implemented enhanced e-commerce, you know that certain e-commerce events need to have additional information provided with them, specific information, right? If you are sending a promotion, like you've promoted a product on your page and you want to show that this promotion has been viewed, you need to send the promotion name. If that promotion is part of a list, you need to send the list ID that the promotion showed up in. So historically with e-commerce, we've had kind of some specific schemas that we've had to follow to make sure that the tool reported on the information correctly. Well, Google has actually expanded that, and we basically have a lot of additional recommended and required events if you want to get the tracking correct. So one thing to note here is just to be aware of this. There's a specific event name that you need to send for page view with specific parameters. If you want to do a search, you need to send a specific named event with specific parameters. So just be aware of this, do some research on it, find the events that Google has pre-spec'd for you, given you schemas for, and be ready to implement them. Couple other quick notes here. Custom dimensions and metrics are super powerful. When you send data to contextualize your events, you send parameters, and then we have the ability to upgrade them to custom dimensions and metrics to be able to actually use those in our backend reporting within the GA4 UI. But there are limits on how many of those you get. And so just be mindful of the way you name things. We encourage you to reuse uniquely named parameters across different events, just so you make sure you don't run into those limits. So if you're on a free account, it's 50. If you're on a 360 account, it's 125. Keep those in mind as you're speccing your events. Also, as always, the event names and parameters you're using are always going to lead into what you want to report on. So just be mindful of that. Data layer is its own, big conversation. What events are you going to source through the data layer versus sourcing through DOM scraping using GTM? Start thinking of those up front and involve your IT team so they're aware of, the scope that they're going to be handed to implement. And then one of the challenges that we have currently, right this second with GA4, is that GA4 is still a product in development. A lot of the features are there, but a lot of them are still being worked on. One of those is item scoped custom dimensions. So if you run an e-commerce site, something in maybe hospitality, then it can be a little bit challenging right this second to include all of the parameters you want to describe your hotel rooms or your flight information, just because right now that's still a feature in development. So just be thoughtful about that and plan ahead. Make sure you understand what features are there and what still is coming, and be ready to adapt for that. All right, next slide. So now that we have implemented everything, or now that we have documented everything and are ready to implement, we're going to jump into this step. So a few things to be aware of, be ready for. So GA4, one of its core, foundational principles is it lets you report on app data and web data in the same interface. And I say app and web, you could technically send information from your internet-enabled refrigerator to Google, or your, internet-enabled heart monitor. GA4 can accept data from a variety of sources, although it is built primarily to accept it from web and app. So just be aware that if you're implementing GA4 on an app, that you want to involve your app development teams. They use a mobile SDK to basically install it on your app and then send data to Google. So just be aware of that and have them ready to be involved. And then for web, we've probably all experienced a tag manager. If you're in Adobe, it's Launch. If you're in Google, it's GTM. That's the way we recommend implementing. So a couple things here as you're going through implementation. Account structure matters. Google has, historically had properties and kind of accounts properties and views. And then we had roll-up properties if we needed to send data from a lot of properties up to kind of one parent property. Now we have a really nice feature called sub-properties, which is kind of the inverse of a roll-up. So you could create one property, send all of your data to it, and then create a sub-property, which is kind of like a view, but it has its own permissioning. It can have its own integrations enabled for it. And it's a super nice way to kind of split up your data. So consent management is a big thing that's kind of come up since Universal Analytics was released. And so the Google team really nicely created a way for us to easily implement consent management tools through GTM consent mode. So one super nice thing to be aware of. Oh yes, and someone said in the chat that sub-properties are only available for 360 users. So yes, be aware of that. Server side is a new topic as well that's come up. We don't have time to get into a lot of details around server side because it's its own kind of beast. But just to note, one thing to note is that server side can really help you with your cookie duration, extending your cookies to last longer. So just be aware that it's a great option. We recommend it for every client that has access to Google Cloud Platform and can implement it to do so. And then lastly, there's a lot of setup to do within Google Analytics once you've actually got your implementation rolling. So as I said earlier, you need to upgrade your parameters to custom dimensions and custom metrics. You need to upgrade, as I said earlier, there are no goals. We need to upgrade some of our events to be conversion events such that they can be reported to your Google Ads accounts and be able to optimize your advertising around them. So just be aware there's some steps within GA to make sure you do that as well. So test and deploy, this one's pretty straightforward. So essentially, as we already talked about earlier, getting your tests written out ahead of time are super important. Oh, he jumped ahead a little fast. But essentially, once you've got your implementation built, you go to a staging environment, you add your new tracking code, and you test things as they come out. One super nice thing that's been added in GA4 is debug view. Essentially, it was a feature from Firebase that lets you see events coming into GA4 in real time and be able to debug them in real time and make sure they look right. So we've always had the challenge of we send data from the browser and we can see the beacons going out, but then we just have to watch the live view in Universal Analytics and hope that everything matches up. Now you can actually see the full events coming in real time and validate them. One other quick point to make here is that right at this moment, AMP pages are not currently supported in GA4, as in there's not an easy way to implement your tracking on an AMP page. If you look around the blogosphere, there are a couple approaches to this, and I've been in meetings where Google is aware that people have this as a concern and they are actively working on AMP page support. But if you're going to implement today, AMP pages are not supported out of the box, so just be aware of that. All right, next slide. So now you have documented everything, you've rolled out your implementation, you've validated it. What's next? Well, as we said, GA4 is a net new tool, and it's one that you're probably going to have to spend some time getting familiar with to be able to report correctly. So let's pop into reporting and team training. So as we said, configuring the property settings, conversions, and custom definitions were an important thing in the implementation step. If you haven't done that yet, you will need to do it before you start reporting within the GA4 UI, just because essentially, as we said, parameters are not available to report on in the UI if they're not out of the box parameters, if they're custom, unless you do this. So complete your configuration, and you can go ahead and start creating reports and dashboards within the UI. There's a nice explorations module that's been added that gives you a lot of flexibility to do things you haven't been able to do before. So flow reporting is, out of the box available for 360 and non-360 clients, where before you had to be a 360 user to be able to use that. So, but just be aware that reporting has changed. Standard reports have been moved, shifted around. Some are still in development. So your analysts will need to be made aware of this. Be aware that goals have been replaced with conversion events, which kind of rethinks the way that you have to handle sending events off to your advertising platform. One super nice thing, big benefit of GA4, is that BigQuery exports have now been added to the free version, whereas before you had to be a 360 user to be able to get your data out of the tool and into BigQuery to do BI reporting or any sort of downstream CDP kind of work. That's now available for free users as well, which is super nice. So enabling the BigQuery integration beyond just being able to use that data, it also helps you kind of understand how the data is saved in the tool. So I encourage everyone to get some BigQuery experience, export your data, look at it, dig into it, and learn more about it. So, and because the underlying structure has changed, one thing to note is if you have applications built on BigQuery data, that you'll likely need to re-architect those to work with the new format of GA4 data. So just be aware of that. If you're doing a lot of downstream BI analysis, CDP kind of work, that essentially you will need to rebuild that to match this new schema. So, and then the last step, integrations and activation. So this is the super fun one. I love turning on integrations for clients. It all starts to become magic. So as we said before, BigQuery is now available to free users. So that's one super nice, easy integration to turn on. There are a few integrations that are still in development. So if you've relied upon the Salesforce integration, that one's still in development. Campaign Manager is still in development. DV360 integration is coming soon. So just be aware that, as we've said throughout this whole thing, it's a great time to start considering your move. And if you want year-over-year data, you should be moving very rapidly just to be able to have a year of GA4 data on the books. But we don't feel that it's maybe the best time to become fully reliant on GA4 data yet, just because a lot of these integrations aren't here. There's still a lot of pieces that are in active development. So just be aware of that, but you can start turning on integrations. You can start connecting it and, just making the magic happen, getting the data flowing and working on all of that. So one thing I didn't point out as we went through these slides is the duration of all of these steps. You'll see it at the bottom, duration 1 week. So during the QA session, depending on how many questions we have, I may run through and give you kind of the overview of our estimate of how long this should take. And I've also got some documents I can show during the QA session to show you kind of how we work with clients to help map out some of these things, document their implementations, et cetera. So, but that's the quick run through. And the great thing about integrations and all of this is GA4 was built with the rest of the Google marketing platform, the Google infrastructure in mind. So as we said, BigQuery for everyone. You can leverage Google Cloud Platform strength. The way that conversion events work make it actually a lot easier to optimize your ads around conversion events, because goals were once per session, conversions are on a per event basis, which that's technical, but basically it gives you a lot more power in optimizing your advertising around the events that are coming out of GA4. And Google Signals is built in. There's a lot of other kind of magical data generation and data support options that it gives you to help with privacy, restricting the data you can collect. So all this to say, the platform works together really well. It was very clear that Google has been thinking platform throughout all of this, and it's all integrated. I think a lot smoother and a lot cleaner than it was in UA. So we're excited to start using this tool with clients. And yeah, as we said, typical duration, 11 to 17 weeks to run through all of these steps is what we are estimating. Now, of course, if you end up caught up with stakeholders and you need to have 37 discovery meetings, this could get longer. If you're team that would be implementing your data layer is delayed. If you don't have the IT support you need, it could take longer, but best case scenario, this is what we think you can do it in. So just be aware of that if you're about to start this journey. And the last piece that we want to say right before we start QA is that we do have an GA4 assessment that you can go through. So it's at searchdiscovery.com/GA4-migration-assessment. If you're considering this move or getting ready for it, you can actually automatically you can answer a few questions, and it will generate kind of a document that will help you understand which parts of this process might you run into a challenge for, which things are you currently using that aren't yet implemented. So really great tool to help you kind of prepare for all of these steps. So that was kind of our presentation. So let me run through some of the questions that we have. And I think Melissa may be helping me here if we have questions that pertain more to Google. So can't KPIs be the same in GA4 as in GA3? So we just reproduce existing tags in GA4. For the most part, yes, with the caveat that if you were firing goals based upon specific page views, we don't have goals anymore that can be automatically fired. What we do have is a super nice feature I didn't get into called Create Event. So as events are streamed into GA4 from your website, you can kind of chain create net new events from those. Someone said the link's not working. We'll get a better link out if that one's not working. So sorry about that. But yeah, getting back to the topic at hand, if you were heavily relying on goals to feed your KPIs, to feed your marketing data, there will be some adjustments you'll need to make. You can use the same tags to a certain extent. I will say that GA4, because it has some pre-named events, you will need to kind of go from the category action label approach to leveraging those new named events. And sometimes those want parameters that you may not have been collecting before. So just be aware of that. But I will say generally, yes, you can use the same KPIs, but if you are, someone who's running a program, this is an opportunity to leverage the move to GA4 to reevaluate and determine, are the KPIs we've been collecting everything we need? The other thing is Google has some really nice features, new ways you can do analysis. We could never do time-based analysis in Universal Analytics, and now we can. We can determine like the average amount of time between someone landing on our site and purchasing that we couldn't before. So I would say reevaluate some of the things that you couldn't get out of Universal before and determine if now you will be able to do that. So is BigQuery integration a two-way stream? I believe it's just one way. I believe it's just from GA to BigQuery. You can't do it the other way, but there are ways to import data into GA. So the product data import and other imports we've had in the past are still there or in active development. So if you need to do dimension widening or other things, that is available, just not through BigQuery. I see Melissa nodding. Great. Would you recommend switching to GA4 if one is using Adobe Analytics? That's a really tricky question. I would say because you can implement it for free, you don't have to pay anything to implement GA4. There's nothing wrong with implementing the free version and trying it out. Just seeing if it gives you more insights than Adobe has had in the past, if it gives you specific, things that Adobe can't cover. I will say right this second, because GA4 is still an active development product, I wouldn't recommend 100% going to it right this second, but I would say take the next year as they're finishing development, implement it on your site, evaluate it, and see if it has anything you don't have. I would strongly encourage you to consider that. We've got a lot of clients running both in parallel. So yeah, don't jump right this second, but take some time, evaluate it. The server side stuff is super nice. The corrections for, privacy issues are super nice. Some of the data modeling and data sciencey stuff that Google's giving you on the back end is super nice. So it's worth reevaluating. Another thing I think is that it's GA4, if you want if you do want to move to it and go to the 360 paid version, I think it's a lot more achievable than it's been in the past. The pricing has changed significantly. So it's worth reevaluating kind of the pricing tier that you would be at and looking into that. So definitely a great time to consider moving to GA4. I'm not going to tell you to jump, but give it a look. So do you have any more insights on that, Melissa? I mean, obviously vested interest in that, but is that fair, or do you have any other additional add-ons?
So sorry, my voice just decided to stop. Can't really speak on like the differences or reasons to switch from Adobe to Google Analytics 4. I will say that the kind of things, the benefits related to GA4 would be the integrations with our bidding arms. So depending on what Google platforms you're using to buy media and how you're going about doing it and what kind of audiences you're looking to create, that would be a benefit in order to either set up GA4 as well. But yeah, can't necessarily speak to the specifics of Adobe and switching to Google.
Got it. Cool. So give it a try. That's my recommendation. Thoughts on using recommended events with identifying parameters instead of custom named events? My recommendation is always use the recommended event if there is one available, just because right now we have some reports built out around these, but my expectation is that more reports may be coming that utilize these built-in events and give you built-in insights that you might not even know will be available. So I strongly recommend, especially for e-commerce, but beyond e-commerce, for even things like share, right? There's an event for a social share. I recommend using that because maybe there's a point down the line when Google integrates with social partners and helps us do more reporting on that if you use their recommended events. So in my opinion, go for it. Have you heard about linking AdSense to GA4? I don't touch as much on the advertising side. Melissa, do you have any insight on that?
Haven't heard any updates to that specific platform, but I can take a look and let you know if we are. Okay,
cool. Considering GDPR and phasing of third-party cookies, are you able to discuss the differences between GA4 and Adobe, or at least how GA4 would work? So GA4 does have some really nice built-in kind of identity. I don't know the best way to put them, but basically there are some ways that Google will, so say that Safari has removed third-party cookies, which they have, right? Google can look at your Chrome data and your Edge data and help kind of augment your Safari data. If Edge and Chrome say that only 10% of your users are returning, but Safari says 0 because it doesn't have third-party cookies, Google has some nice built-in tools that can actually elevate Safari up to that 10% level. So I think there are actually a lot better built-ins to Google for GDPR compliance as far as cookie compliance. There are other questions swirling around the world that Google's starting to reply to on other issues of GDPR, but cookies specifically. The other thing is Google's server-side solution, I think, has a lot more flexibility than Adobe's event forwarding right now. And so I think it's a more powerful way to handle GDPR concerns than Adobe's offering. So if GDPR is your issue, be watching what the European courts are saying, how Google is replying to those. But for cookies specifically, I honestly, truly think Google has the better solution here right now. And consent mode with GTM that helps you cover that. Yeah, there's just a whole lot of things that Adobe has not matched yet. So product finding method, I honestly am not on the analysis side as much, so I don't have as much insight into this. I know that this is one of Adobe's strengths. And so I do want to say that, I assume that Google has done some work on this, but I don't offhand know that. Melissa, do you have any more insight on product finding within GA4?
I'm actually not familiar with kind of the Adobe stack and the specifics, but if you have questions, please feel free to follow up with any questions digging on our side.
Yeah, I don't know enough about this offhand, and with probably 90 seconds left, I don't know that I can talk in depth, but I think that is something worth researching, and I'm going to do some digging on my own. If you want to drop us an email, maybe we can do a little digging and figure out some more information about it. But yeah, so, and then the last one is from that same person. Customer ad product from 3 different places. Yeah, so that gets into product finding method. All right. So yeah, I would say ping us, either the community, Cory, or someone else, and we'll try to get back to you on that. But I think that covers all of the QA questions.
Melissa, go ahead.
Oh, that I wanted to answer quickly. I saw it come through the chat where someone was asking about a lack of views in GA4. I wanted to say that filters would be the best kind of solution to that. So happy to provide some more information on that. But I know that the limitation on views is feedback that we've gotten, and there is a solution to kind of provide a similar use case, not use case parity, not necessarily feature parity.
Yep. Okay, so there were a lot of questions in chat. I don't know that we'll get time on all of them, but the 10-second bounce rate's on its way. Get excited. There is a roadmap. We are aware of it. I don't know how public it is, so just be there. Thanks for the comment on my 80 specs. I appreciate it. And Freeverse GA360 increased limits, more custom dimensions, custom metrics, plus some extra, I don't know, do you have that offhand, Melissa? I'm sure it's on the internet
Well, would be
somewhere.
another feature.
Yeah, sub properties and roll-up properties are a big one. So there were a lot more questions. Unfortunately, we're at time. I didn't even see these. I was looking in the QA section, but
That's okay, Cory
Yeah.
and Melissa, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate your expertise and sharing all of your knowledge with everyone. And for the audience, we will get to the questions that weren't answered live, and we will follow up with you. We will also be sending out the recording, and we will be posting on our SDEC webpage, which is on our website. So take a look there. And there will be lots of new enhancements coming down the pike in the next 3 to 6 months. So if you are not an active member of the SDEC, it's time to get active and find all these new things that will be coming out from our SDEC group to you guys. So stay tuned. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a wonderful day.